We're back with Full Court Faith, and we've got a bridge episode today, and we're going to talk about the next series and kind of have some lighter content. But, Johnny, before we begin, I saw this post on X yesterday, and I want to hear your thoughts on it. It was a really long thought. I'm going to try to consolidate it. Now, no relation to my guy. The poster's name is Jason Howerton, which is kind of a funny tie-in. But he's got 130-something thousand followers, and he's a thought leader on Christian living. So I'm going to read you this post. I just want your response to it. It's a little lengthy. There is one biblical concept that changed my relationship with sin forever. I've never been the same. The concept is that we as Christians are judged differently by God depending on our knowledge and understanding of the Word and God's nature. The closer you get to God, the more He expects of you. When you accept this reality, the wages of engaging in casual sin go way up. The past 2 years are honestly the first time in my life where I've felt the fear of God. I fear disappointing the Father, but also His wrath. If I fully understand the gospel and God has revealed the truth to me, and yet I continue to stay in habitual sin, then as Romans 1 says, I am without excuse. God is love, but God is also wrath. When I say judged in this sense, I'm not referring to salvation. I am still a sinner and still need daily repentance. However, the Lord disciplines the children He loves just as we discipline our own kids. And wouldn't your punishment for your 16-year-old who got arrested for a DUI be more harshly than your 3-year-old who broke a plate? Because the 16-year-old knows better. I know better. I'm grateful for this, but it also feels heavy sometimes. So I want your thoughts on that, because if I'm understanding it right, the thought is that not all sin is equal per se.
There's so much in there. I've never heard of this guy or this quote, so my initial thought is there's certain things I agree with and a lot that I don't agree with.
So tell me, because I want to practice discerning what you read on the internet.
Yeah.
That's why I brought this up.
No, that's a great example. So there is, I would agree, different levels of accountability. The more you know, I think you're more accountable. Jesus talked about the religious leaders committed the greater sin. I think there was a dynamic of there's more expectation the more you know. At the same time, Paul says in 1 Thessalonians that God has not destined us for wrath. So the believer will never undergo the wrath of God in that sense. However, the believer will always undergo the discipline of God. So the quote from Hebrews, God disciplines those whom He loves, is true. And so God does discipline us, and oftentimes it can be in correction of sin. And we just went through Kings and look at the correction David received, and I think he received harsh discipline for harsh sin. But we don't undergo wrath in the sense of fear of, oh no, I'm going to be condemned to hell because I sinned. If you are a genuine believer, Paul says in Romans 8, there's no condemnation for those in Christ. Because Christ became a curse for us. He underwent the wrath of God in our place on the cross. So I'd like to make a really strong distinction between the wrath of God, punishment for your sin, and the discipline of God for the believer to his son or his daughter. So I don't see those as the same thing, and I don't even know if that gentleman was saying that, but it kind of seemed like he was blending those two things. But I do agree with him on that there's the example, I would hold a 16-year-old way more accountable for doing something of a serious magnitude than my 5-year-old for, doing something simple at home that she knows she's not supposed to do. So clearly, we can see that example in our own lives, and I think that Scripture would reaffirm that. So those are just my initial thoughts. What were your thoughts based on what I just said?
Well, I've been kind of thinking about for a while the passage in Romans where it talks about if you believe it's a sin and still do it, then it's a sin. If you're not convicted of it, what passage am I thinking of?
That's in Romans 14. To him who thinks it is a sin, it is a sin, like a conviction level.
Right. So my eyes have been open to more so the concept of it being a little bit less of a linear line and more of a more complex to where, I don't know, I guess a good example is if I don't think Halloween's a sin and I don't think it is, and my kids go trick or treat, I don't think they're sinning. But if I do think it's a sin, and then I do it anyways, then that's probably wrong.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm looking at the verse. It's the last verse of Romans 14. At least one. There's a couple verses, but this is one I was thinking of. But he who doubts is condemned if he eats, because his eating is not from faith. Whatever is not from faith is sin. So I think like there's freedom, Christian liberties, and like that's a great example. Halloween. If you're thinking, okay, this is fine. Like I'm not celebrating witchcraft or darkness, and I want my kids to have a great experience and fun and joy and candy and family time, like I'm going to go do it. But if you think that there's like a darkness element to it, then you shouldn't do it. And like I know, like even with that specific example for our family, I grew up in a house that we didn't celebrate Halloween at all, and we had good substitutes at church. We had fall parties, fall festivals, and in our house, specifically, like when our kids were really little, we called it Candyland. And we just tried to make it like really fun. Like, and we just kind of did like a ton of candy for our kids. And then as they got older, we started joining family and friends to go trick-or-treating. And we just said, you know what, we're not going to do anything dark. Like you can do superheroes and whatever you want, but it can't be dark. And we're not going to celebrate darkness. We're going to celebrate the light. And so, you know, things that are dark in nature, like we don't like that, because as believers it talks about living in the light. So those are some kind of conversations that we have with our kids, and we try to, there's a Christian word, redeem something. Like I think you can go into and participate in Halloween and it not be good, but I think you can also redeem that and make it a really fun experience for your family and like be a light. So
yeah,
that's
so anyways,
take.
Longest introduction ever. But I was thinking yesterday, I was like, man, I think we should at times practice discerning what we read on the internet, because that's probably the number one source of information that a lot of Christians are getting their biblical knowledge from, unfortunately. I hope it's the Bible, but I do think there's so much online now. It's like, how do you discern what's right and what's wrong? So when I see stuff like that, I may pull it in here and ask thoughts on it as we practice for just our spiritual walk. Now, after that 7-minute introduction, we're going to get to our episode right now. Johnny, the next 18 episodes will be on the Sermon of the Mount topics, and they're just going to be all over the place as far as not a solidified format, but we're going to talk about each of the things, except we are going to skip the part on divorce because we literally just did it. If you're curious about sexual immorality, just go back 2 episodes. We just covered it. So I'll remind people whenever we get to that part, they can go listen to that episode. I don't want to be redundant, but we really just want to go through it and apply it to life, to apply it to other parts of the Bible, see the backstory of the things Jesus was teaching and what he wants us to learn from that. So Johnny, before we kind of dilly-dally the rest of this podcast, could you give some context to the Sermon of the Mount, details that led up to it, what it meant for the ministry, how it could be used today?
Sermon on the Mount is the 3 chapters in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And we call it the Sermon on the Mount because Jesus gave an extended period of teaching, preaching, sermon, i.e., and it was in Matthew 5, it says that he stood on a mountainside. So we think, okay, Sermon on the Mount. Context, this is kind of near the beginning of Jesus' ministry. At the same time, it's not the very, very beginning because he had disciples. And who's there? Like who, what, when, where, why? Who's there? In Matthew 5, it says his disciples, but then at the very end, the last few verses in Matthew 7, it says the crowds were in astonishment. So there's a lot of people there too. So you have followers, I think curious people. Where is this happening? At the end of Matthew 4, right before it, setting the stage, the context. Jesus is going throughout Galilee. He's performing miracles. People are kind of interested in who this guy is. They think that it's probably where it's near Capernaum, near the Sea of Galilee, so up in northern Israel and Galilee. So who, what, when, what is it? Jesus is kind of, that's the biggest debate, is like, is this a plan of salvation? Is this instructions for how to live in the kingdom? And I would say one of the biggest things that Jesus is trying to do is he's trying to target, like at the time, the religious leaders were really, really good about the externals of religion. And I think Jesus is trying to show like it's an internal righteousness. God desires us to follow him on an internal basis, a genuine, authentic, like John 4, those who worship me must worship in spirit and truth, or worship the Father. And so, like, there's many times in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus would say, "You have heard of that, it was said," and then he quotes the law, and he's contrasting just the external kind of rote, going through the motions of doing it without your heart, and saying, "But I say to you," and then he amplifies it. He raises the level to something that was even deeper and more internally focused than what the law prescribed on the outside. So I think Jesus is targeting the heart, and that's like one of the biggest themes you'll see throughout the Sermon on the Mount, is not just like practicing something on the outside, but genuinely allowing God to change you on the inside and following him on the inside.
Yeah, I'm excited to go through this. It's going to be 18 separate episodes, and they might be shorter because there's some sections, if you've read through Matthew 3 through 5, there's some that are like 3 sentences, 4 sentences long, and we may break them down elaborately, or we may just touch on them, especially as the summer comes. Are we traveling and all that stuff? We want to make sure we're still doing episodes, but at the same time be realistic. So Johnny, I said there's going to be a bridge. So we're going to bridge to the Sermon on the Mount. So we're going to now get to some fun stuff and just kind of lighten it up a little bit as we stretch our muscles. So I was thinking of the Sermon on the Mount, this really famous speech from Jesus. I was like, what could I think of the famous speeches of all time are, like, to me? And I'm curious about yours as well. The first one I thought about was The Man in the Arena by Teddy Roosevelt. As a basketball coach, in my job now, you're kind of on stage. It's like you're just kind of out there for people to form their opinions on you. You put yourself out there, you're vulnerable every single time. Every single time you walk up on the stage, whether it's announcements and you're telling a joke, or it's a message you're speaking to youth group students or adults, like, you're putting yourselves out there to be judged. And I'm not saying that's what people are there to do, but that's just kind of the nature of being in the arena. So Theodore Roosevelt in 1910 wrote this: "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of the deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." And I used to read this to my basketball team frequently, Johnny, and I would tell them, like, you just can't worry about the noise of what people are saying. Like, you're the one trying it, and you're either going to succeed or you're going to fail, but you tried and you did it. And you can't let the people not trying and not doing it weigh you down, especially in sports. Yeah. So has that quote ever come up for you before?
Yes. My sister introduced that to me in high school, and I just think, like, I was trying to think as you were reading it, basically it's like, don't listen to the armchair quarterback or the backseat driver. And it's like, in a sense, like, yeah, we should always listen to people, but at the same time, take it with a grain of salt, like another cliche today. But like, you're going to fail. Like, everybody who's doing anything is going to fail. We're going to fail at certain things, but I think you should fail intelligently. You should fail because you're trying something that you think can be successful. And when it doesn't work out, then adapt, make adjustments, and then you'll probably find some measure of success. And it's easy to criticize from the outside and from not participating and like, well, you should do this. And it's like, well, would you help me do that? No. Like, and so it's always easy for us to criticize from the outside. And I think when people are failing with you, it's easier to listen to them because they're trying with you, as opposed to they're not in the arena with you battling too. And that's one of those, I think, like, everybody can relate to that in life, whether you're doing that as a parent or with friends in your neighborhood or at school or at church or at your job. Like, people are going to criticize you no matter what you do. And I think it's a dynamic of, how am I failing when I fail? And are these people battling with me? And are they failing with me too? And if they are, I'm going to probably give them a larger hearing because they're at least in the arena too.
Right. 116 years later, it still upholds, I think, you should be commended for trying, and I think you should not have a whole lot of space to be hurt if you're not. In sports is the biggest one, where it's like people are yelling at a coach to be fired, or it's like you don't like that's not fair. You don't know. Maybe he should be, maybe he shouldn't be, but you don't know. And I stopped doing that once. Once I started coaching, and I realized just how much is out of my control and how hard the criticisms are. But then I was experiencing Doc Rivers as a Milwaukee Bucks coach, and now it's really hard for me to not say anything. But what was your first speech that came to mind?
Mine is a potentially fictitious speech, but in the movie Braveheart, William Wallace gives an amazing speech at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. I had to get the name right. And I just want to read a little paragraph, because you did give me prep on this, like favorite speeches. And this is one of those, like, he's saying, I'm William Wallace. I see a whole army of my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny. You've come to fight as free men, and free men you are. What do you do without freedom? Will you fight? And then one guy in the crowd says, fight against that? And he's looking at the English. And he says, no, we're going to run. We will live. And then William Wallace says, yeah, you fight. You may die, run, and you'll live, at least for a little while. And then he says, dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance to come back here and tell our enemies they may take our lives, but they may never take our freedom? And that's where, like, I just get chills when I see that scene in Braveheart, and it's just this emphasis on, like, you can't take our freedom. That really got me going. And I don't know if that's actually what William Wallace really said in real life, but it's a great movie line.
But it's also just about running to the fight in general. Like I could tweak that to just you have to have a hard conversation with someone at work. Would you rather have avoided it altogether and just kind of like pretended to have peace, or have that hard conversation and deal with hopefully what you did was your best in that moment? And I think if you don't have it, then you wonder the rest of the month or whatever it is, like, should I have done it? And you agonize over it instead of just ripping off the Band-Aid and doing it. And I think there's a lot of commendability to being able to run to the fight. I really like that one. I haven't seen Braveheart in, I don't know, probably decades, but I do remember that when you started reading that, I was like, I remember that thoroughly now. That one, and Remember the Titans had some pretty good speeches. I should have went to that one. I'll just do two real quick. They're both sports one. The Tim Tebow one is always a crowd favorite. Florida loses, and I think the specifics of it was he said to the fans and everyone in Gator Nation, I'm sorry. Basically said, like, my goal is to win. I promise you one thing, a lot of good will come out of this loss. You'll never see any player in the entire country play as hard as I'll play the rest of the season, and I'm going to be working harder than anyone to strive for this goal. And it was someone who took accountability. That's what I loved about it. I see some of these people, celebrities, athletes, whatever, they're just going to deflect. Well, I didn't have enough good players. The ball didn't bounce our way. They're refs. Where he's like, I'm sorry that I came up short, but it won't happen again. Like, I will hold myself accountable. The second one is just a Packer favorite. In like 2014, Green Bay started off really slow, and everyone's freaking out because we'd have like 3 or 4 straight years of like 15 wins. And Aaron Rodgers says, RELAX to the reporters, to all the fans. And they went on a run and made the playoffs and all that stuff. But what I liked about it was, like, everyone gets all frazzled if something's not going well. They get all frantic. Oh my gosh, it's panic, panic, panic. Sometimes, like, a leader just has to say, like, calm down. We're going to be okay. Like, we got a long journey ahead of us. Just calm down. So those were the two sports ones that were in the old ticker.
I like that. I got one more sports one for you. One of my favorite speeches of all time was in 2007, Mike Gundy, football coach of Oklahoma State Cowboys. Look it up on YouTube sometime if you haven't seen it. But he goes off on a newspaper reporter who wrote an article on one of his players that he benched. It was the quarterback. And basically in the article, the person said, like, that the kid was scared. The coaches thought he was scared. He was kind of a coward. So then the coaches went with the other quarterback. And Mike Gundy went off. And he said, don't go after my player who does everything right. He's a kid. He's not a professional. And we didn't say that. We didn't say he was scared. He does everything right. He goes, come after me. I'm a man. I'm 40. And it's like kind of one of those sound bites you'll always hear. I'm 40. But going like leadership style, he's defending one of his own. It reminds me of like a good shepherd. The good shepherd defends and looks after their sheep. And I think a great coach steps up for his player when his player's getting kicked when he's down. And I will always respect Mike Gundy for doing that for his players.
So that was probably 15-ish years ago?
Yeah, 20,
okay.
About 20 years ago.
Is it weird to you now, not to like call you out, but for you to be 40? Is that not weird that you're at that age?
It is funny. Like, I'm actually 41, and it's funny thinking about him being, like, I've always thought of him as so old. And I'm like, he's probably like the same age I am now. But I just love the fire that he had in that. Yeah. And you'll get a good chuckle. Just if you've never even heard of Mike Gundy, Google Mike Gundy, I'm 40, and it'll give you a good chuckle.
Well, my favorite chuckle at a sports speech moment was this bowler who won the bowling championship in like the early 2010s. He knocks down like this whatever strike in a row, and he points at himself and he starts yelling to the crowd, "Who do you think you are? I am!" And he yells out like 3 times. And he was so jacked up. What about favorite quotes? I got 2 sports ones, 1 author one, but I'm going to let you start first. Favorite quotes.
Favorite quotes, one of my first ones is Jimmy Johnson, coach of the Cowboys in the 90s. Let the mind control the body and not the body control the mind. And we saw that on a documentary of him in the training camp. And it's kind of funny because I would say that to my kids at cross country every day in the fall. And I would say, let the mind control the body and not the body control the mind. And then Kinley, our sweet little Kinley, she's like, Dad, our coach tells us something like that every day. You don't have to remind me.
Well, that's why I can't run long distance, because my body rules that decision-making process when my lungs
got to overturn it. Let
not
the
a
mind
runner.
Control the body.
I got to work on that. My favorite quote that I've always used every single year as a coach, and I still think about even in the job I'm in today, is from Bob Knight, who is a fiery guy. But I print this out and put it in the locker room every year. Most people have the will to win, but few people have the will to prepare to win. And I just love that, because everyone wants to succeed. Like, It'd be weird if you didn't. Everyone wants a church to thrive. Everyone wants your business to thrive. Everyone wants a healthy family. Everyone wants to be in shape. Everyone wants a sports team to win. But not many people want to do the work that it requires to be successful. Like, on a team, the work requires workouts, staying early, or showing up early, staying late, mental prep, film watch. Not a lot of players want to do that. They all want to win, but they don't want to put in the work. In a church community, like, everyone wants a growing, thriving church. But then you have like the volunteer requests go out or stuff like that, then it's like less people want to step into that. And I think the church in general, I'm not never just singling out our church. I think in general, the body of Christ, like, we all want to grow the kingdom, but we don't all want to be in tough situations where growing the kingdom requires some grit, or maybe some of your personal time to go mentor a family, or to show up to church early to set up, or leave late to take down, or to teach a class. With your families, the intentional conversations, not everyone wants to have those, the hard conversations. We all want to succeed, though, but we just don't want to put in the effort to succeed. And I think that is a quote that will always mean something to me.
I think something you said at the very end was, like, with your family. Like, everybody, I think, wants a good family. Like, of course I want my family to be close. And, like, I want my kids to feel like they can trust me and we can have the hard conversation. But then it's like, are we having those conversations? And I know, like, I'm always being challenged in realizing, wow, like, there's things that I thought my kids knew that they don't, and I need to do a better job of, like, being clear of, like, hey, let's talk about this specific thing. So hopefully that can be an encouragement of, like, it does take a lot of work and intentionality, and it just requires, like, you doing the things, giving the time, having the conversation. I think those are very applicable, but especially with families too.
Yeah, give me one more.
I always like the one, I looked it up this week. I've never even heard of the guy. It's like a high school coach, but it was quoted by other people. Kevin Durant used it. But hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And I love that. I think that can really motivate you of like, okay, like I may be somewhat gifted and that guy may be, or gal may be way more gifted than me. But if I work hard, eventually, if they don't work hard, like I'm going to catch up. And I think like you can always find exceptions to that rule, right? You can always say, well, if so-and-so is this and so-and-so is that, like you can never like narrow that talent gap. But I'd say like generally speaking, if you work hard and someone who is really, really talented never works at all, like eventually you're going to catch up and you'll probably slowly pass them. And I think that is used in sports to motivate people to work hard, but I think it can be applicable in every part of your life.
Every facet of life, everything. My last one, I would say a dark horse, if someone said, who's Hunter going to use as a quote source? Rudyard Kipling has a quote that also I really liked my entire life. It's the strength of the wolf is the pack, and the strength of the pack is the wolf. So many people assume they can just latch on to a good team, and the good team, all that matters is that the team succeeds. But like, you still have to play a part. You can't just go, all right, I'm all about the team. It's like the kid in the group project who's like super happy and amicable, but he does none of the work and he just hopes to get an A. Or it's like, no, like you still have to show up and you still have to put in work, and vice versa. Like you can't just show up and put in work for yourself without working as a team. So in order to have a great organism, you have to be someone who puts in the work and values the team. And I think that quote, perfect, really good. What section do you expect to hit you the hardest in this series?
Man, I read Sermon on the Mount this morning, 5, 6, and 7, and it's cop-out answer, all of it. But like it is so real. It's so raw. It hits like every part of your heart. But I think like one of the sections in Matthew 6 where he says, don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow each day has enough worry of its own. And there's always a reason to worry about something, whether it's something to do with your job, something to do with your family, your kids, something to do with finances, something to do with a relationship, a conversation. Every single one of us has something that we could be tempted to worry about. And Jesus is saying, don't worry. Like, be anxious for nothing, Paul would say in Philippians 4. So that really hit me. And just one side note, Sermon on the Mount, Jesus probably spoke a lot longer than just Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Like, you could read that in 10 minutes. I think his sermon was more than 10 minutes long. But I think those are highlights of the things that he probably, like, very, very rich, concentrated doses of what he was saying. And then it was, like, fleshed out from there.
Well, it seems so obvious, but I've never thought about it like that. I mean, now that you say that, it's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But I just wouldn't have thought that way reading through it. My section I expect to hit me the hardest that I really need to think about is love your enemies. I really struggle when someone like goes out of their way to become your enemy. Like they wrong you, not like someone who messes up. You know what I mean? Like, not like, hey, I accidentally said the wrong thing, or, you know, I didn't show up when you were counting on me. That's forgivable. That's fine. Like someone who like is a thorn in my side, is that goes out of their way to either like irk me or turn people against me or whatever it might be. I really struggle with letting that go. And that's something I really want to be able to do better. I'm not someone who always outwardly shows that, but mentally I kind of keep a receipt, and that receipt shows up whenever I have an interaction. I just keep it moving instead of loving on them. I'm not as verbal as you would think. I'm more verbal and playful, like interactions, like kind of razzing guys or whatever. But whenever I'm like really upset about something or disagreeing with someone, like it's just radio silence, because now I'm just checked out on that. So for me, I expect that one to be the most like, I've really got to think about this before I speak on it.
That's so good. What you said reminded me of Hebrews, where it talks about like, don't let the root of bitterness grow. Like, don't let bitterness take root in your heart, because then it affects like your ability to love them, which we're called to love. It affects your ability to forgive them because you don't want to. It's going to affect your ability to show self-control and patience towards them because you're going to not have it. I mean, that's a huge thing, and I think we're all susceptible to that. When we've been hurt, it's easy for bitterness to stay there, and I think like that phrase, like keep short accounts, like try to like deal with it quickly so that that bitterness doesn't grow and spread and become like a cancer in our hearts.
Yeah. You've been in Revelation for a while. Can you give us a update, some highlights of some things you've learned lately? Like 3 minutes or less?
Oh my goodness. I'll try to be quick. We do Revelation on Wednesday nights. Many of our listeners here on Full Court Faith attend the class, so it's fun. We kind of talk about this podcast. We talk about Revelation. Honestly, it is one of my favorite Bible studies I've ever done because the people who are there are like really hungry and they care about it, and they're researching it during the middle of the week, and they're looking at stuff online and sending me videos of like, hey, what do you think of this? And so I've just have really been encouraged of the ability to dig into it and dialogue with each other about it, because sometimes Revelation is like one of those off limits, like, oh, we don't study that because that's confusing and it's very like chaotic or unclear. And it's like, you know what? There's a lot in there like that we can't understand. There's a lot in there that we can't. But I've personally been encouraged. We're going to be going through, Lord willing, chapter 10 this week. And we're almost near halfway through the book. It has been a blast of just getting in there and seeing the sovereignty of God, that God is king, that God has a plan, that nothing is out of his control. That's a big thing I've been learning in Revelation.
One of these days, we're going to take a pause when you get towards the end of Revelation, and I want to pepper you with, it'll be fresh on your mind, so you'll be able to answer all these things. I'm just going to pepper you with Revelation questions and end times theories from the internet and stuff. I just want to see kind of what you say from that. And the last thing I wrote down as we kind of catch up and bridge into some real topics next week, what is God currently teaching you about parenting in this season of life?
What I'm learning is I need to do a better job listening to my kids. I think God's wired me to be a preacher, so I like to talk. And like some of you might be thinking, man, you talk way too much, man. But that's just like, I love it. I love like talking about God's word, and I'm just a preacher. And that I think like that's a good thing. That's how God's wired me, in the right context and in the right dosage. And sometimes I can be probably more preachy with my kids than listening, and I think that he's teaching me to listen to them and to give them the platform where they can speak to me, and I actually listen and just kind of keep my mouth silent, quiet, and instead of like coming back with an answer that I know I have a strong conviction on. Like, I just want to hear them out. And so that's what I'm learning right now.
You're entering a tough phase. I think from working with kids, having young kids, working with high schoolers, middle schoolers, I think middle school is the most tricky because they're like out of that innocence age of the elementary toddler age, but they're not quite to the high school, like can function in adult conversation type deal. And they're just kind of in this weird in-between phase, and they're going through puberty and am I well liked at school? What's important? What am I going to be about? And there's identity searching. Middle school gives me chills thinking about. So I could imagine that would be a tough phase to go through. For me, I'm realizing how much they mirror us. So like the things you say, the attitude, the way you carry yourself, you think. Part of me wants to go, I can do that because I'm an adult. You're a child. You can't. The other part of me goes, why do you have to do that as an adult? Like, is it necessary? Now, I think discipline is. So there will be times where I'm hard and say things that are critical. But like the way I interact with Natalie, the way I interact with friends, we just have to be way more careful about. Natalie and I have talked about this. Like Griffin will say something, Nolan will say something. We'll look at each other and we'll be like, that's me or that's you. And it's like, gosh darn it. And that's something I'm trying to be more cognizant of. We're not like smoking cigarettes around them and swearing at them and stuff, but just kind of the way we carry ourselves and the attitude's been really contagious.
Very true. More is caught than taught.
That's right. Last thing for you, quick youth sports corner. So Griffin started football, and I've sent Johnny this video. And this kid, you guys have been listening for a long time. Maybe you're sick of hearing about Griffin, but I don't know. It's entertaining. And he's finally playing football. He's been so excited for this, and he's been playing in the backyard. And there's two things that stood out. Number one, he was doing his dance celebrations almost after every play. And the secondhand embarrassment was unreal. Like when there's like a incomplete pass, he's nowhere near the play and he's whipping out the gritty, or he's doing some sort of dance. I had to have a long talk with him after the game and say, Griff, if you make the NFL, you can do that. But let's not until you make the NFL, if you do. So that's the first thing that stood out. It was super cringy, but we're glad he was having fun. The second thing is this kid's tough, man. And I've wondered how tough he is. Like, can you handle football? I think it's what every parent who signed their kid up for football wants to know. Like, can you handle this? And I've sent you this video. Maybe I can get it to play over this whenever we put it on YouTube. And he's running to the goal line. He makes a good cut. He bounces it outside. He's about 20 yards. He's about to dive for the goal line. And a kid out of nowhere spear tackles the tar out of him. And in
flag football, not tackle football.
Yes, and Johnny can confirm. I'm not exaggerating.
He got crushed. I was like, this is flag football.
Yes, and in that moment, I was wrestling. I'm proud of you for being tough, and he got up. He was wincing. That was one he deserved to lay down on the ground for a minute, but he got up. He kind of held his back walking back to the huddle. But I was also angry at the other kid and the other coach for that happening. But I think this football career is going to be a roller coaster for me, Johnny, for the next 10 years, because he's all in, and it is one day in for us, and it is so stressful to watch.
I can affirm Griffin is tough. Griffin is good. And Griffin has a world-class post-play celebration abilities.
I sent Johnny a video of his teammate scored, and he is a good teammate. He whipped out about 4 different dances. One of the things Dane said to me, Johnny, was you could tell in his mind he had so many dances he was thumbing through, he couldn't figure out what to do, so his hands were kind of spasming, and
he was like glitching because he's like, which one do I do? While running back like 60 yards back, he was doing about 4 or 5 of them. It was great.
Oh, I hope you guys don't get tired of these stories, but a lot of people will come up to me and ask me about Griffin, so I think it's good. We're gonna start our Sermon on the Mount series next week. I'm really excited about it. We appreciate you guys for joining Full Court Faith, and we'll see you soon.